On February 26, 2020, at 2:10 p.m., gunshots echo through one of the oldest breweries in America. 5 workers die. Electricians, machinists, powerhouse operators, men who went to work that morning like any other day. They never come home. The brewery is called Miller Valley, 80 acres, 160 years old. The red Miller sign above Milwaukee still glows. But the family that put it there is long gone. In 1855, a German immigrant bought a rundown brewery for $2,300. He built it into the second largest brewery in America, invented a beer that revolutionized an entire industry. Then his life's work was sold to a chemical conglomerate, a cigarette manufacturer, a South African corporation, a Canadian company. 6 owners in 170 years. What happens to a brewery when its name is nothing more than a logo on a can? This is the story of Miller Brewing. Friedrich Miller is born in 1824 in Riedlingen, a small town in the Kingdom of Württemberg. As a young man, he learns the art of brewing, not just anywhere, but at the Royal Brewery in Sigmaringen, in the heart of Hohenzollern. He learns how to select hops, how yeast works, how temperature determines taste. He learns everything there is to know about beer, and then he leaves Germany. In 1850, at the age of 26, Friedrich Miller boards a ship to America. He carries little with him, but he brings something more valuable than gold, his own brewer's yeast, a culture from Sigmaringen that he saves across the Atlantic like a treasure. Once in America, he searches for the perfect place for his brewery. The choice falls on Milwaukee, Wisconsin, not by accident. In the 1850s, Milwaukee is a city full of German immigrants, people who drink beer like water, people who are homesick, and homesickness is best cured with a good beer. In 1855, Miller finds what he is looking for. The Plank Road Brewery, founded by Charles and Lorenz Best, sits on the edge of the city in the Menomonee Valley. The Bests have neglected the business. The equipment is outdated, production has stagnated. But Miller sees something the Bests have overlooked. Beneath the brewery lie natural caves. Cool, dark, perfect for storing beer. He buys everything for $2,300. Adjusted for today, roughly $82,000. Along with it, he takes on 25 workers. What Miller does next makes him famous. The Best had a primitive cave system. Small, crumbling, barely usable. Miller tears it all down and builds anew. Brick by brick, 600 feet of tunnel. Capacity, 12,000 barrels. In an era without electric refrigeration, these caves are a technological masterpiece. The beer ages for months at a constant temperature, cool, undisturbed, shielded from the summer heat of Wisconsin. The result? A beer that tastes better than anything Milwaukee has ever drunk. The Plank Road Brewery becomes the Miller Brewing Company, and it grows. Year after year, Miller reinvests every cent back into production. New kettles, larger storage tanks, more workers. The German community in Milwaukee drinks his beer, then the Irish community, then the Polish. The beer knows no borders. But Friedrich Miller does not live to see the full triumph. On June 11, 1888, he dies. He is 63 years old. In the 33 years since buying the Plank Road Brewery, he has grown production from 300 to 80,000 barrels per year, a 266-fold increase. The 25 workers have become a small army. His 3 sons, Ernest, Emil, and Frederick A., along with their brother-in-law Carl, take over the operation. They incorporate the business as the Friedrich Miller Brewing Company, and they continue what their father began. By 1906, the legendary brick caves are replaced by modern refrigeration houses. Technology has caught up with nature. By 1919, production reaches 500,000 barrels per year, 500,000 barrels. The little brewery on Plank Road is now an industrial powerhouse. The Miller family has proven that a German immigrant with a handful of yeast and a vision can build an empire. But in 1920, a law takes effect that threatens everything. A law that will drive hundreds of breweries into ruin. Prohibition begins. And for the Miller Brewing Company, the fight for survival has just started. On January 17, 1920, the 18th Amendment takes effect. The manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages is now illegal across the United States. Prohibition, the noble experiment, they call it. For America's breweries, it is a death sentence. Before Prohibition, the United States has over 1,300 breweries. Within a year, hundreds shut their doors forever. Entire neighborhoods built around brewing collapse overnight. Workers who have spent their lives making beer are suddenly unemployed. The industry that helped build cities like Milwaukee, St. Louis, and Cincinnati is wiped off the map almost overnight. But not every brewery dies. The ones that survive get creative or desperate. Miller Brewing chooses to fight. The company pivots to anything legal it can produce. Cereal beverages, beer-like drinks with almost no alcohol, soft drinks, malted milk. If it does not contain alcohol and people will buy it, Miller makes it. The Grand Brew House on Plank Road, built to produce 500,000 barrels of beer a year, now churns out products that Friedrich Miller would barely recognize. But the doors stay open. The workers keep their jobs, and the family holds on. Ernest Miller, who has led the company since his father's death, does not survive Prohibition. He dies in 1922, 3 years into the dry era, at a time when the future of American brewing looks hopeless. His brother Frederick A. Miller takes over as president. Frederick A. is a steady hand, not a visionary but a survivor. He keeps the company alive through the darkest years, waiting for the law to change. On December 5, 1933, Prohibition ends. The 21st Amendment repeals the 18th. Americans can legally drink again, but the landscape of American brewing has been destroyed beyond recognition. Of the 300 breweries that existed before Prohibition, fewer than half reopen. Many have sold their equipment, lost their workers, or simply run out of money. The ones that come back are the big ones, the companies with deep enough pockets to survive 13 years without selling a single drop of beer. Anheuser-Busch, Pabst, Schlitz, Coors, and Miller. But Miller is not among the leaders, not yet. The company restarts production, rebuilds its distribution network, and slowly regains its footing. Frederick A. Miller runs the business conservatively. No bold moves, no grand expansions, just steady, careful growth in a market that is still finding its legs again after more than a decade of enforced sobriety. This changes in 1947. Frederick A. steps aside, and his nephew and Frederick C. Miller takes over as president. Frederick C. is a different breed entirely. Where his uncle was cautious, Frederick C. is ambitious. Where his uncle preserved, Frederick C. expands. He pours money into new equipment, modernizes the brewery, and increases capacity aggressively. But his most brilliant move has nothing to do with beer. Frederick C. Miller brings Major League Baseball to Milwaukee. In 1953, he plays a central role in relocating the Boston Braves to Milwaukee, where they become the Milwaukee Braves. The move electrifies the city, and Frederick C. makes sure that Miller Brewing is right there at the center of it, sponsoring games, advertising in the stadium, tying the Miller name to the roar of the crowd and the crack of the bat. Beer and sports. It sounds obvious today, but in the early 1950s, this connection is still being forged, and Frederick C. Miller is one of the men holding the hammer. Sales climb. The Miller name spreads beyond Milwaukee for the first time. The Little Plank Road Brewery, once a local operation, begins to think nationally. Then on December 17, 1954, a small plane crashes on the outskirts of Milwaukee. On board are Frederick C. Miller and his son. Both are killed. Frederick C. is 48 years old. At the time of his death, Miller Brewing ranks 9th among American breweries. 9th, not first, not second, but 9th. The expansion he started is still in its early stages. The national ambitions he dreamed of are still just dreams. And now the man driving those dreams is gone. The death of Frederick C. Miller does more than take a leader from the company. It fractures the family's grip on the business they have owned for nearly a century. Without Frederick C.'s vision and energy, the remaining family members struggle to find direction. The brewery continues to operate, but the momentum is lost. A crack has opened in the foundation of the Miller empire. It will take a decade for that crack to widen. But when it does, the family will lose everything. The outsiders are coming. For over a century, the Miller Brewing Company belongs to the Miller family. Through wars, depressions, and 13 years of prohibition, they hold on. But after Frederick C. Miller's death in 1954, the family begins to splinter. Without a strong leader, the company drifts. Miller remains stuck in 9th place among American breweries. Profitable, but going nowhere. Then in 1966, the unthinkable happens. Lorraine John Muhlberger, Frederick Miller's own granddaughter, sells the company. The reason is almost too ironic to believe. She objects to alcohol. The granddaughter of a man who crossed the Atlantic with brewer's yeast in his hands, who built 600 feet of brick tunnels to age beer, who devoted his entire life to brewing, that man's granddaughter does not believe in the product that bears her family's name. The buyer is W.R. Grace and Company, a sprawling chemical conglomerate with interests in shipping, agriculture, and industrial materials. A company that knows nothing about beer. The Miller family, after 111 years, walks away from the brewery on Plank Road. But W.R. Grace does not hold Miller for long. Just 3 years later, in 1969, a far more powerful buyer comes knocking, Philip Morris. To understand what happens next, you have to understand Philip Morris. In 1969, Philip Morris is not just a tobacco company, it is the tobacco company. Its flagship brand, Marlboro, is the #1 selling cigarette in the world. Philip Morris has something that almost no other company in America possesses at this scale. A marketing machine so powerful, it can make people desire a product that is literally killing them. Philip Morris buys Miller Brewing for $130 million, outbidding PepsiCo in the process. A cigarette company now owns one of America's oldest breweries. It sounds absurd. But Philip Morris is not buying Miller for the beer. It is buying Miller for the opportunity. The American beer market is enormous, and Miller, despite its history, controls only a tiny sliver of it. Philip Morris sees what the Miller family never could. With the right marketing, Miller can be transformed from a regional player into a national giant. The first thing Philip Morris does is send in its own people. John Murphy, a lawyer who has worked at Philip Morris since 1962, is appointed president of Miller Brewing. Murphy is not a brewer. He has never made a batch of beer in his life. He does not know the difference between a lager and an ale, but he knows how to sell. And in the world Philip Morris is building, selling matters more than brewing. Murphy looks at the numbers and sees the problem immediately. Anheuser-Busch dominates the American beer market. By the early 1970s, Anheuser-Busch accounts for roughly 1/4 of all beer sold in the United States. Their flagship brand, Budweiser, is a household name. Their distribution network stretches into every corner of the country, and their advertising budget dwarfs everything Miller can afford. Or rather, everything Miller could afford before Philip Morris arrived. Because now Miller has access to something it has never had: the advertising budget of the most successful consumer products company on earth. Philip Morris is spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year convincing Americans to smoke Marlboro. Now it will spend the same kind of money convincing them to drink Miller. But Murphy knows that money alone will not close the gap. Anheuser-Busch is too far ahead. Miller cannot simply outspend Budweiser and win. He needs a different weapon, something new, something that does not yet exist in the American beer market. In 1972, at a dinner in Munich, West Germany, Philip Morris chairman George Weissman is on a diet. He asks a waiter to recommend something light. The waiter suggests a Diet Pilsner, a low-sugar beer originally brewed for diabetics. Weissman tastes it. It is light, crisp, refreshing, and an idea begins to form. That same year, Murphy hears about a small bankrupt brewery in Chicago, Meister Brau. Among its assets are 3 beer brands, including one called Meister Brau Light. The recipe was originally developed by a biochemist named Joseph Awadz at the Rheingold Brewery in Brooklyn. Awadz had discovered a way to use an enzyme called amyloglucosidase to break down high-calorie starches, producing a beer with fewer calories but similar taste. Rheingold had tried to sell it as Gablinger's diet beer. It flopped. Meister Brau tried to sell it as a diet beer too. It also flopped. Nobody wanted to drink diet beer. Murphy buys the rights to the recipe, but he has no intention of making the same mistake. He will not sell diet beer. He will sell something else entirely. He just needs to figure out how to sell it. The answer will change the American beer industry forever, and it starts with a retired football player in a rented bar in Manhattan. Every failed product contains a lesson. Gablinger's diet beer failed. Meister Brau Light failed. Both had the same recipe, a genuinely lighter beer with fewer calories, and both made the same mistake. They told the truth. They told consumers, this beer has fewer calories. This beer is lighter. This beer is better for your waistline. And American men, the people who actually drink the most beer, heard one word: diet. Diet meant weakness. Diet meant watching your figure. Diet meant something your wife drinks. No self-respecting man in 1970s America is going to walk into a bar and order a diet beer. He would rather die of a heart attack. John Murphy understands this. He does not have a brewing degree. He has never worked a fermentation tank, but he has spent a decade at Philip Morris, the company that convinced an entire generation that smoking Marlboro makes you a cowboy. Murphy knows that the product does not matter nearly as much as the story you tell about it. And the story of diet beer is a losing story. So Murphy changes the story. He takes the Meister Brau recipe and hands it to Miller's brewers. They spend a year reformulating it, adjusting the flavor, refining the process, making it taste less like a compromise and more like a real beer. The result is a 96-calorie lager with 4.2% alcohol. Light, crisp, drinkable. But the taste is only half the battle. The other half is the name. Murphy kills the word diet forever. The new beer will not be called Miller Diet. It will not be called Miller Light. It will be called Light, just Light. A word that sounds like light but looks different on a label. A word that has no association with dieting, no connection to calorie counting, no hint of weakness. Light is not a diet beer. Light is a new kind of beer. Now Murphy needs to prove it, and he starts in the most unlikely place imaginable. Anderson, Indiana. Before the national launch, McCann Erickson, Miller's New York ad agency, discovers something strange in the sales data. In the small city of Anderson, Indiana, Meister Brau Light is selling remarkably well. Not to dieters, not to women, not to health-conscious yuppies. It is selling to blue-collar men in working-class bars. Men who drink 5, 6, 7 beers a night and have discovered that the lighter beer lets them drink more without feeling bloated. This is the insight that changes everything. Murphy is not selling a diet beer. He is selling permission, permission to drink more, permission to stay at the bar longer, permission to have another round without feeling like your stomach is going to explode. In July 1973, McCann Erickson rents a bar in Manhattan for 3 days of shooting. They need a spokesman, someone who embodies toughness, masculinity, blue-collar authenticity. Federal law prohibits using active professional athletes in alcohol advertising, so they choose a retired one. Matt Snell, former running back for the New York Jets, star of Super Bowl III in 1969, where the Jets pulled off one of the greatest upsets in football history. Snell is big, tough, and credible. If Matt Snell drinks this beer, no one is going to call it a diet drink. The script is loose, almost improvised. For 3 days, Snell sits in that rented bar, drinking light, talking to the camera. Late on the 3rd day, he finally delivers the line that will define the brand. You know, new light beer from Miller is all you ever wanted in a beer, and less. Everything you always wanted in a beer, and less. It is brilliant. It does not say fewer calories. It does not say lighter. It says less, and lets the drinker decide what that means. Every failed product contains a lesson. Gablinger's diet beer failed. Meister Brau Light failed. Both had the same recipe, a genuinely lighter beer with fewer calories. And both made the same mistake. They told the truth. They told consumers, this beer has fewer calories. This beer is lighter. This beer is better for your waistline. And American men, the people who actually drink the most beer, heard one word: diet. Diet meant weakness. Diet meant watching your figure. Diet meant something your wife drinks. No self-respecting man in 1970s America is going to walk into a bar and order a diet beer. He would rather die of a heart attack. John Murphy understands this. He does not have a brewing degree. He has never worked a fermentation tank, but he has spent a decade at Philip Morris, the company that convinced an entire generation that smoking Marlboro makes you a cowboy. Murphy knows that the product does not matter nearly as much as the story you tell about it. And the story of diet beer is a losing story. So Murphy changes the story. He takes the Meister Brau recipe and hands it to Miller's brewers. They spend a year reformulating it, adjusting the flavor, refining the process, making it taste less like a compromise and more like a real beer. The result is a 96-calorie lager with 4.2% alcohol. Light, crisp, drinkable, but the taste is only half the battle. The other half is the name. Murphy kills the word diet forever. The new beer will not be called Miller Diet. It will not be called Miller Lite. It will be called Light. Just Light. A word that sounds like light but looks different on a label. A word that has no association with dieting, no connection to calorie counting, no hint of weakness. Light is not a diet beer. Light is a new kind of beer. Now Murphy needs to prove it, and he starts in the most unlikely place imaginable, Anderson, Indiana. Before the national launch, McCann Erickson, Miller's New York ad agency, discovers something strange in the sales data. In the small city of Anderson, Indiana, Meisterbrow Light is selling remarkably well. Not to dieters, not to women, not to health-conscious yuppies. It is selling to blue-collar men in working-class bars. Men who drink 5, 6, 7 beers a night and have discovered that the lighter beer lets them drink more without feeling bloated. This is the insight that changes everything. Murphy is not selling a diet beer. He is selling permission. Permission to drink more. Permission to stay at the bar longer. Permission to have another round without feeling like your stomach is going to explode. In July 1973, McCann Erickson rents a bar in Manhattan for 3 days of shooting. They need a spokesman, someone who embodies toughness, masculinity, blue-collar authenticity. Federal law prohibits using active professional athletes in alcohol advertising, so they choose a retired one, Matt Snell, former running back for the New York Jets, star of Super Bowl III in 1969, where the Jets pulled off one of the greatest upsets in football history. Snell is big, tough, and credible. If Matt Snell drinks this beer, no one is going to call it a diet drink. The script is loose, almost improvised. For 3 days, Snell sits in that rented bar, drinking light, talking to the camera. Late on the 3rd day, he finally delivers the line that will define the brand. You know, new light beer from Miller is all you ever wanted in a beer. And less. Everything you always wanted in a beer. And less. It is brilliant. It does not say fewer calories. It does not say lighter. It says less, and lets the drinker decide what that means. The Matt Snell commercial works, but Murphy is not satisfied with one retired football player. He wants an army. After Snell, McCann Erickson tries a few different directions. Mystery writer Mickey Spillane, actress Lee Meredith, drummer Buddy Rich. Some work, some do not. But with the 14th Light commercial, Murphy and his team finally crack the code. They go all in on athletes, not just any athletes, retired legends. Men whose names alone mean toughness, grit, competition. Ray Nitschke, the ferocious middle linebacker of the Green Bay Packers. Ben Davidson, the hulking defensive end of the Oakland Raiders. Bubba Smith, the towering giant who terrorized quarterbacks for the Baltimore Colts. These are not men who drink diet beer. These are men who break bones for a living. And now they are on national television arguing, not about politics, not about money, but about beer. Tastes great. Less filling. The argument is staged, of course. A parody of a barroom brawl where everyone takes sides but nobody throws a punch. It is funny. It is loud. It is endlessly repeatable. And it becomes one of the most successful advertising campaigns in American history. Advertising Age magazine will later rank it the 8th greatest ad campaign of all time. 8th, alongside Coca-Cola, Volkswagen, and Nike. In January 1975, Miller Lite rolls out nationally. The advertising blitz is staggering. $10 million, the heaviest launch spending for a new beer product in memory. Philip Morris money, Marlboro money, the kind of budget that a family-owned Milwaukee brewery could never have dreamed of. The response is immediate and overwhelming. At the Fort Worth Brewery in Texas, 18-year-old Ralph Rodriguez starts work in the shipping department just as Miller Lite hits the market. Decades later, he still remembers the chaos. The brewery runs around the clock. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no days off. Trucks line up outside the loading docks faster than workers can fill them. Every brewery in the Miller system is pushed to its limit. The numbers tell the story. In its first year, Miller Lite produces 12.8 million barrels. By 1977, just 2 years later, production hits 24.2 million barrels, nearly double. Miller, which ranked ninth among American breweries when Frederick C. Miller died in 1954, rockets to second place. Only Anheuser-Busch stands above it, but the impact goes far beyond Miller. Other breweries scramble to respond. Schlitz launches Schlitz Light. Coors introduces Coors Light. Pabst rolls out Pabst Extra Light. Every major brewer in America rushes to create its own version of what Miller has invented. Before Miller Lite, light beer does not exist as a category. Within a generation, it will account for nearly half of all beer sold in the United States. By 2002, light beer controls 44% of the American market, a market that was zero before 1975. And Miller's ambitions do not stop at light. In the early 1970s, Philip Morris overhauls Miller's oldest brand, Miller High Life, the champagne of beers. The old advertising featured needlepoint images of bottles and the cozy slogan, "Home is where the Miller is." Philip Morris throws all of it away. They hire McCann Erickson to reposition High Life as a working man's beer. Tough, honest, unpretentious. The new slogan is simple, two words that will become part of the American vocabulary. Miller Time. The campaign is a masterpiece. Blue-collar workers finishing their shift. Construction crews cracking open cold bottles. Farmers sitting on tailgates at sunset. Miller Time is not just a slogan. It is a promise. You have worked hard. You have earned this. This moment belongs to you. Between 1970 and 1978, sales of Miller High Life quadruple, from just over 5 million barrels to 21.7 million, second only to Budweiser itself. In 1979, Miller ships nearly 24 million barrels of High Life to distributors across the country. It is the highest the brand will ever reach. The little brewery that Friedrich Miller bought for $2,300 is now producing over 40 million barrels a year across all its brands. Revenue exceeds $4 billion. The company employs 9,500 people and operates 6 breweries, 5 can manufacturing plants, a glass bottle factory, and a label production facility. Miller Brewing is an empire, but empires built on marketing live and die by marketing. And somewhere in St. Louis, a man named August Busch III is watching everything Miller does. He is not impressed. He is furious. The beer wars are about to begin. For most of Miller's history, Anheuser-Busch barely notices it exists. The real rivalry in American beer has always been Anheuser-Busch versus Pabst, or Anheuser-Busch versus Schlitz. Miller is a regional brewery from Milwaukee, respected but irrelevant, a mosquito buzzing around the ankles of a giant. Then Philip Morris arrives, and the giant wakes up. August Anheuser-Busch III takes control of Anheuser-Busch in the early 1970s, pushing aside his own father, Gussie Busch, in a corporate coup that will become legend in American business. August III is ruthless, disciplined, and paranoid. He watches Philip Morris pour hundreds of millions into Miller's advertising and sees an existential threat. This is not a brewery coming after him. This is the company behind Marlboro, the most powerful marketing machine on the planet. Philip Morris was a much more powerful company than Anheuser-Busch. Author William Knoedelseder later explains, their product was the #1 product in the world, Marlboro cigarettes. So August III thought, oh my God, these guys are coming after us. We got to really go after them. And he does. The first shots are fired over Lowenbräu. In the mid-1970s, Miller acquires the U.S. distribution rights to Lowenbräu, a German beer with a 600-year history. Miller launches an $11 million advertising campaign positioning it as a premium imported beer. There is just one problem. Miller is brewing Lowenbräu in its own American factories. The bottles look imported, the ads feel imported, but the beer inside is made in Milwaukee. Anheuser-Busch files a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission, accusing Miller of deceptive packaging and false advertising. The message is clear. Anheuser-Busch will fight dirty if it has to. Miller fires back. When Anheuser-Busch introduces natural light, Miller publicly points out that there is nothing natural about it. The attacks escalate, lawsuits fly, attack ads air on national television. American beer, once a gentleman's industry built on handshakes and regional territories, becomes a war zone. But the real battle is not over Lowenbräu or natural light. The real battle is over light beer. Miller Lite dominates the light beer category through the late 1970s because Miller Lite created the light beer category. For nearly a decade, no competitor can touch it. The tastes great, less filling campaign is a cultural phenomenon. The retired athletes, the fake barroom arguments, the humor that makes men feel good about drinking a lighter beer. By the early 1980s, Miller sits comfortably in second place behind Anheuser-Busch, and the gap is narrowing. Then in 1982, Anheuser-Busch launches Bud Light. At first, it does not seem like a threat. Miller Lite has a decade of brand loyalty, an iconic advertising campaign, and first-mover advantage in a market it invented. Bud Light is just another copycat, one of dozens of light beers launched in Miller Lite's wake. Schlitz Light, Coors Light, Pabst Extra Light, they all came and went. Why should Bud Light be any different? Because Anheuser-Busch does not do anything halfway. August the 3rd commits the full resources of the largest brewery in America to destroying Miller Lite's dominance. The advertising budget is enormous, the distribution network is unmatched, and the marketing is smart. Anheuser-Busch positions Bud Light not as a diet alternative, but as the natural extension of Budweiser, America's beer. If you drink Bud, you will love Bud Light. The message is simple, relentless, and everywhere. In the late 1980s, Anheuser-Busch introduces Spuds MacKenzie, the original party animal. A bull terrier in sunglasses surrounded by beautiful women, living the life that every beer drinker secretly wants. The campaign is absurd, controversial, and wildly effective. Bud Light sales begin climbing at double-digit rates. Meanwhile, something unexpected is happening inside Miller. The company's own success is eating it alive. Miller High Life, once the flagship brand, the beer that built the empire, begins to collapse. Between 1981 and 1986, High Life sales drop 60%. 60% in 5 years. The cause is cannibalization. Miller Lite is so successful that it is stealing customers from Miller's own premium brand. Every new barrel of light sold comes partly at the expense of High Life. The company that invented light beer is being destroyed by its own invention. Miller tries to plug the gap. In 1985, the company introduces Miller Genuine Draft, one of the first premium unpasteurized beers in the United States. Instead of pasteurization, MGD uses cold filtration to preserve freshness. The launch is strong. 2.3 million barrels within 2 years. Heavy advertising and a unique market position make it a genuine hit. For a moment, it looks like Miller has found a third pillar to stand beside Light and High Life, but it is not enough. The losses from High Life far outweigh the gains from Genuine Draft, and Anheuser-Busch keeps growing. By the mid-1980s, the numbers are brutal. Miller sells approximately 41 million barrels a year and holds a 21% market share. Anheuser-Busch sells 67.8 million barrels and holds 36.6%. The gap is not narrowing anymore. It is widening. Philip Morris demands results. The cigarette company did not spend $130 million to buy a permanent second-place finisher. Executives are replaced. Strategies are rewritten. Marketing budgets are increased again and again. Nothing works. The dream of overtaking Anheuser-Busch is slipping away, and the worst is yet to come. In 1990, Miller Lite still controls 33% of the American light beer market. Bud Light holds just 19%, a comfortable lead, 14 points. Miller Lite has been the king of light beer for 15 years. It invented the category. It owns the category. 7 years later, everything is reversed. By 1997, Bud Light controls 30% of the light beer market. Miller Lite has fallen to 22%. The lead has not just disappeared, it has flipped. Bud Light does not simply catch Miller Lite. It passes Miller Lite and keeps accelerating. For 5 consecutive years, Bud Light adds volume on a double-digit basis. 10% growth in 1994, 11.5% in 1995, nearly 14% in 1996. An industry publication calls it an exception to every rule in the beer business. In a decade where total beer consumption is flat, Bud Light grows like it is selling something other than beer. The question that haunts Miller's executives is simple. What went wrong? The answer is complicated, but it starts with advertising. Miller Lite's legendary "Taste Great, Less Filling" campaign runs for over 15 years. By the late 1980s, it is exhausted. The retired athletes are getting old. The fake barroom arguments feel stale. The humor that once felt fresh now feels like a rerun. American culture has moved on, but Miller Lite has not. Anheuser-Busch, meanwhile, keeps reinventing. After Spuds MacKenzie retires in 1989 amid controversy over marketing to children, Bud Light pivots seamlessly to new campaigns. Each one is sharper, funnier, more culturally relevant than the last. Bud Light does not cling to its past. It sheds its skin every few years and emerges looking new. Miller Lite clings to its glory days. And the glory days are fading. But advertising alone does not explain the collapse. The deeper problem is strategic. Throughout the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Miller Brewing makes a series of decisions that fragment its own brand portfolio. Milwaukee's Best and Meister Brau, two lower-priced beers, are introduced to capture the budget market. By 1988, these economy brands represent 16.9% of Miller's total output. They are profitable in the short term, but they dilute the company's identity. Miller is no longer a premium beer company. It is a company that sells everything to everyone. Premium, light, economy, draft. And in doing so, stands for nothing. Miller Genuine Draft is a perfect example. Launched in 1985 as a premium unpasteurized beer, MGD initially carves out a unique position, but Miller cannot resist cannibalizing itself again. By 2007, Genuine Draft holds just 1.5% of the U.S. market. By 2012, it is down to 0.7%, a decline of 1.7 million barrels. A brand that once looked like the future quietly bleeds out. In 1994, the unthinkable finally happens. Bud Light overtakes Miller Lite in total sales. The crown that Miller Lite has worn since 1975, the crown it built from scratch with Matt Snell and Ray Nitschke, and a $10 million advertising blitz, now belongs to Anheuser-Busch, and it will never come back. Philip Morris watches all of this with growing impatience. The cigarette company has owned Miller since 1969, a quarter of a century. It has poured billions into advertising, expansion, and new product development. And Miller is still second, not a close second, a distant second that is falling further behind every year. In 1995, Miller tries to revitalize its light franchise with new campaigns. They do not work. In 1996, the company makes them perhaps its most desperate move, launching a new beer called simply Miller. No subtitle, no qualifier, just Miller. The hope is that a clean, simple brand name will cut through the clutter. One marketing expert compares it to Ford Motor Company, bringing out a new car called the Ford. The product meets its modest 1% market share goal, but the confusion it creates among consumers does more harm than good. The late 1990s bring one final humiliation. Miller Lite launches an advertising campaign called Dick. It is meant to be edgy and humorous. It is neither. Sales drop. The campaign is pulled. And according to industry insiders, the failure makes Miller afraid to take creative risks for years afterward. The company retreats to safe, generic advertisements. Bro humor, party scenes, beautiful women. That could be for any beer brand in America. Miller Lite loses not only its market share, but its voice. By 1997, the numbers tell the full story. Miller Brewing holds a 23.9% overall market share. Anheuser-Busch holds 47.8%, exactly double. Miller sells 43.8 million barrels a year. Anheuser-Busch sells 91.1 million. The dream of overtaking Anheuser-Busch, the entire reason Philip Morris bought Miller in the first place, is not just dead. It was buried years ago, and Philip Morris is done pretending otherwise. After 3 decades, the cigarette company is ready to sell. The anti-tobacco movement is growing. Lawsuits are mounting. Philip Morris wants to clean up its portfolio, shed its non-core assets, and focus on what it does best, selling cigarettes. Miller Brewing, the company it once believed could conquer American beer, is now just a line item on a balance sheet. The for sale sign goes up, and the buyers who come calling are not from Milwaukee. They are not even from America. In 2001, Miller Lite makes a decision that seems small at the time. The iconic white can, the one that launched in 1975, the one that millions of Americans associate with taste great, less filling, the one that started a revolution, is retired. In its place, a sleek blue can. Modern, clean, corporate. The blue can is a disaster. Not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, steadily, the blue can erases everything that made Miller Lite recognizable. Focus groups will later reveal the problem in brutal clarity. Consumers look at the blue can and see a soda, not a beer, a soda. In a market where authenticity and heritage are everything, Miller Lite has voluntarily stripped itself of both. Shortly after Miller switches to blue, Bud Light adopts a nearly identical color. Now the two brands sit side by side on store shelves, practically indistinguishable. Miller Lite, the original light beer, the brand that created an entire category, looks like a knockoff of its own competitor. But the blue can is only a symptom. The disease runs much deeper. Throughout the early 2000s, Miller Brewing throws product after product at the market, hoping something will stick. Miller Genuine Draft, once the promising third pillar, is in freefall. From 1.5% market share in 2007 to just 0.7% by 2012, a loss of 1.7 million barrels. Miller Chill, a lime and salt chilada-style lager, launches successfully in 2007 but collapses the following year when Anheuser-Busch counters with Bud Light Lime. Miller 64, an ultra-light beer with just 2.8% alcohol and 64 calories, enters the market in 2007 as well. It finds a small niche but never becomes a major brand. Milwaukee's Best, Miller's economy label, holds its ground at the bottom of the market but does nothing to build prestige. The pattern is always the same. Miller launches, a competitor responds with something bigger, better funded, and more aggressively marketed. Miller retreats. The company has become reactive. Always chasing, never leading. The boldness that created Miller Lite in 1975 is gone. In its place is a corporation paralyzed by the fear of another failure, and the advertising reflects it. After the Dick campaign disaster of the late 1990s, Miller Lite's marketing becomes cautious to the point of invisibility. The company leans heavily on what industry observers call bro ads, party scenes, attractive women, male bonding over beer. They could be commercials for any beer brand in America. There is nothing distinctive, nothing memorable, nothing that makes a viewer think of Miller Lite specifically. The brand that once owned the conversation has gone silent. Meanwhile, something far more significant is happening behind the boardroom doors. In 2002, Philip Morris finally pulls the trigger. After 33 years of ownership, the cigarette company sells Miller Brewing to South African breweries, SAB, for $3.6 billion in stock and $2 billion in assumed debt. The combined entity becomes SAB Miller, one of the largest brewing conglomerates on earth. The deal makes financial sense. SAB Miller gains access to the American market, the most valuable beer market in the world. Philip Morris unloads a business it has grown tired of fighting for. But for Milwaukee, the sale carries a different weight entirely. Miller Brewing, founded by a German immigrant on Plank Road in 1855, owned by the Miller family for 111 years, then by an American chemical company, then by an American tobacco giant, now belongs to a corporation headquartered in London, with roots in Johannesburg, South Africa. The brewery on State Street still operates. The red Miller sign still glows over Milwaukee. But the decisions are no longer made in Wisconsin. Philip Morris retains a 36% ownership share and 24.99% of voting rights. It is a strategic hedge, a way to keep one foot in the beer business without bearing the operational burden. But for the workers at Miller Valley, the numbers on a stock certificate mean nothing. What matters is that the boss is now an ocean away. The years that follow bring more change. In 2006, Seb Miller purchases the Sparks and Steel Reserve brands for $215 million. These are not premium products. They are malt liquors and caffeinated alcoholic beverages. The kind of brands that Frederick Miller, with his handcrafted brick caves and carefully aged lagers, would not have recognized. The company that once stood for craftsmanship is now chasing margins in the cheapest corners of the market. By 2007, total U.S. beer sales are flat. Americans are drinking less beer than they did a decade ago. The craft beer revolution is pulling premium consumers away from mass-market brands. Wine and spirits are gaining market share among younger drinkers. And within the mass-market segment, Anheuser-Busch continues to tighten its grip, controlling roughly half of all beer sold in America. Miller is stuck. Too big to be craft, too small to compete with Anheuser-Busch, too corporate to have a soul. The company needs a lifeline. In 2007, SAB Miller finds one, but it comes with a price that Milwaukee will pay for years. A merger's on the table, and when it is done, the last connection between Miller Brewing and the city that built it will be severed. In June 2008, the announcement comes. SAB Miller and Molson Coors, the second and third largest brewers in the United States, will merge their American operations into a single joint venture. The new entity will be called Miller Coors, headquarters, Chicago, not Milwaukee. Chicago. The decision hits Miller Valley like a punch to the gut. For 153 years, every major decision about Miller Brewing has been made in Milwaukee. Every new product, every advertising campaign, every expansion plan, all of it born within walking distance of the brick caves that Friedrich Miller built in 1855. Now the executive offices, the marketing teams, the strategic planners, they are all moving 90 miles south to a glass tower in downtown Chicago. SAB Miller owns 58% of the joint venture. Molson Coors owns the rest. On paper, they share equal voting power. In practice, the two parent companies are thousands of miles apart, one in London, one in Montreal. Neither has any historical connection to Milwaukee. Neither has ever set foot in the Menomonee Valley. The brewery on State Street is now a production facility, a factory, a line on an organizational chart managed by people who have never met the workers inside it. The numbers in Milwaukee tell the story of what a merger really means. Brewery employment holds steady at roughly 750 workers. The machines still need operators. The beer still needs to be brewed and shipped. But corporate office jobs, sales, marketing, executives, the people who decide what Miller is and what Miller will become, drop by 370 from nearly 1,000 to just 6-7. In a single reorganization, Miller Valley loses more than a third of its white-collar workforce. For the blue-collar workers who remain, the change is subtler but no less real. Chris Mecca, a machinist who starts at the brewery in 2001, will later describe it in simple terms. When he arrives, he is number 83 on the seniority list. More than 80 machinists work at Miller Valley. Year after year, that number shrinks. Workers retire, workers leave. Nobody replaces them. The ones who stay pick up the extra shifts, cover the extra machines, absorb the extra workload. Molson Coors calls it efficiency. The workers call it something else. But the Miller-Coors merger is not the end. It is the beginning of the end. The merger is designed to do one thing: compete with Anheuser-Busch. In 2008, Anheuser-Busch controls approximately 50% of the American beer market. Miller Coors, by combining the Miller and Coors portfolios, creates a company large enough to challenge that dominance. Together, they produce Miller Lite, Coors Light, Miller High Life, Blue Moon, Leinenkugels, Milwaukee's Best, and dozens of other brands. It is a formidable lineup. There is just one problem. The competition is not standing still. In July 2008, the same month that Miller Coors officially launches, a Belgian-Brazilian conglomerate called InBev completes a hostile takeover of Anheuser-Busch for $52 billion. The most iconic American beer company, the maker of Budweiser, the king of beers, bought by Europeans. August Busch IV, the fourth generation of the founding family, fights the deal but ultimately loses. Anheuser-Busch becomes Anheuser-Busch InBev. The headquarters moves to Leuven, Belgium. Hundreds of jobs are cut in St. Louis. The American beer industry no longer belongs to Americans. Miller and Anheuser-Busch, the two companies that waged the beer wars for 30 years, that sued each other over Löwenbräu and attacked each other in primetime commercials, are now both owned by foreign corporations. One by a London-based conglomerate with South African roots, the other by a Belgian-Brazilian giant that operates more like a private equity firm than a brewery. The men who built these companies, Friedrich Miller with his brick caves, Adolphus Busch with his pasteurization patents, would not recognize what their empires have become. For 7 years, Miller Coors operates as a joint venture, two parent companies sharing one American operation. It is an awkward arrangement. SAB Miller in London owns 58%. Molson Coors in Montreal owns 42%. They share equal voting power, but unequal ambitions. SAB Miller is a global empire spanning 40 countries across 4 continents. The American operation, Miller Lite, Miller High Life, Milwaukee's Best, is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. For Molson Coors, the American market is everything. This imbalance matters because in September 2015, the largest deal in the history of the beer industry is announced. Anheuser-Busch InBev, the Belgian-Brazilian giant that swallowed Anheuser-Busch in 2008, makes an offer to acquire SAB Miller. The price, $107 billion. It is not just the biggest deal in brewing history, it is one of the largest corporate acquisitions in the history of the world. If completed, the combined company will control roughly 1/3 of all the beer produced on the planet. The deal has nothing to do with Miller Brewing. Miller is not the prize. SAB Miller's operations in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. Those are the prize. The fast-growing markets where billions of new consumers are discovering beer for the first time. Miller, with its flat American sales and its fading brand portfolio, is an afterthought, a side dish at a banquet worth $100 billion. But there is a problem. American antitrust law will not allow the world's 2 largest brewers to combine their U.S. operations. AB InBev already controls roughly half the American market. Adding Miller's brands would push that share to levels that no regulator would approve. The U.S. Department of Justice demands a divestiture. SAB Miller must sell its stake in Miller Coors before the deal can close. The buyer is already sitting at the table. Molson Coors, the junior partner in the Miller Coors venture, purchases SAB Miller's 58% stake for approximately $12 billion. In a single transaction, Molson Coors goes from minority partner to sole owner. The Miller brands, Miller Lite, Miller High Life, Miller Genuine Draft, Milwaukee's Best, and everything else bearing the Miller name in the United States, now belong entirely to a Canadian company. On October 11, 2016, the deal closes. AB InBev absorbs SAB Miller. The London headquarters is dismantled. The SAB Miller name disappears, and Miller Brewing Company, what remains of it, passes to its 6th owner in 170 years. Friedrich Miller, the Miller family, W.R. Grace, Philip Morris, South African breweries, Molson Coors, a German immigrant, a grieving granddaughter, a chemical conglomerate, a cigarette company, a South African corporation, a Canadian brewer, 6 owners, 6 different visions, 6 different reasons for holding the company, and 6 different reasons for letting it go. Not one of them after the Miller family ever bought the company because they loved the beer. They bought it for the market share, the distribution network, the brand equity, the tax advantages. They bought it the way you buy a piece of furniture, because it fills a space, not because it means something. The human cost of these transactions is measured quietly, in numbers that never make headlines. When AB InBev completes its takeover of SAB Miller, the combined company announces plans to eliminate approximately 5,500 jobs worldwide over 3 years. The cuts are part of a $1.4 billion annual savings target, roughly 1/10 of SAB Miller's entire revenue. AB InBev is famous for this. When it acquired Anheuser-Busch in 2008, it achieved cost reductions of 16% of sales. When it bought Mexico's Grupo Modelo in 2013, the same playbook was applied. Analysts call it efficiency. Workers call it a bloodbath. In Milwaukee, the impact is both direct and symbolic. The brewery on State Street keeps running. It has to. Someone needs to brew the beer, fill the cans, load the trucks. But the corporate presence that once made Miller Valley the beating heart of American brewing continues to shrink. The executive suites are quieter. The parking lots are emptier. The decisions are made in Chicago or Montreal or wherever the next conference call originates. Chris Mesha, the machinist who started at Miller Valley in 2001 as number 83 on the seniority list, watches the workforce around him dwindle year after year. By the time Molson Coors takes full ownership, the machinists' group has been cut in half. More than 80 when Mesha arrived, barely 40 now. Every departure means more work for those who remain. Every retirement that goes unreplaced is a signal, not spoken aloud but understood by everyone on the floor, that the company views this workforce as a cost to be minimized, not an asset to be invested in. The 80-acre complex still stands. The red Miller sign still burns above the Milwaukee skyline. Thousands of cans roll off the packaging line every minute. A distribution center the size of 5 football fields ships beer to every corner of America. But the soul of the place, the thing that made Miller Valley more than a factory, is harder to find with each passing year. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in February, something happens that no merger, no acquisition, and no corporate restructuring could ever have prepared them for. Wednesday, February 26, 2020, a cold afternoon in Milwaukee, temperature in the low 30s. The kind of day when the steam rising from the brewery towers is visible for blocks. A familiar sight in a city that has been brewing beer for more than a century and a half. Inside the sprawling 80-acre complex on West State Street, more than 1,000 employees are at work. The afternoon shift is coming in. The morning shift is wrapping up. In the powerhouse, the building that generates steam and electricity for the entire operation, operators monitor gauges and check pressure readings. In the machine shops, machinists service the equipment that keeps the packaging lines running. In Building 4, electricians move between floors, maintaining the systems that hold a 160-year-old brewery together. It is an ordinary Wednesday, the kind of day that disappears from memory the moment it ends. At approximately 2:08 p.m., Anthony Farrell, a 51-year-old electrician who has worked at the brewery for more than 15 years, leaves the campus. Minutes later, he returns. He is carrying a firearm fitted with a silencer. At 2:10 p.m., the shooting begins. Farrell moves through Building 4. He does not fire randomly. He targets specific co-workers, men he has worked beside for years. The shots come quickly. In the stairwell of the second floor, in the corridors, in the spaces where these men have spent thousands of hours of their lives, 5 men die. Jesus Valle Jr. is 33 years old, a loving husband, a father. His family will later say he had a great life ahead of him. A young man just beginning to build something. He works as a powerhouse operator, keeping the steam and electricity flowing through the brewery. The people who knew him call him Jesse. Gennady Levshets is 61 years old. His colleagues know him as Gene. He is the oldest of the victims, a man nearing the end of a long career at the brewery. He is a machinist, one of the skilled workers who keep the heavy equipment running. He has been at Miller Valley for years, long enough to remember when the parking lots were full and the seniority lists were deep. Dana Walk is 57, another powerhouse operator, another man who showed up every day, did his job, went home to his family. 3 years from retirement, 3 years from the end of a working life spent inside these walls. Dale Hudson is 60. Like Walk, he is close to the finish line, a career measured in decades, not years. An electrician who has kept the lights on and the machines humming in a brewery that runs around the clock. And then there is Trevor Wetzelaar. He is 33, the same age as Jesus Valle Jr., but his path to Miller Valley is unlike anyone else's. Trevor Wetzelaar grows up in the Milwaukee area. He attends the University of Wisconsin, where he meets his college sweetheart, the woman he will later marry, the woman his family calls his soulmate. After college, Trevor joins the United States Navy. He enters nuclear power training school, one of the most demanding programs in the military. He spends 2 years in training, then 4 years serving aboard the USS Maryland, a nuclear submarine. He is decorated twice for his service. After 6 years in the Navy, Trevor wants one thing: to come home, to be close to his family, to settle down in one place after years of deployment and relocation. In 2018, he gets his wish. He is hired as a powerhouse operator at Miller Brewing Company. The job is steady, the pay is solid, and most importantly, he is finally home. His family will later write, "He was so happy when he became a powerhouse operator at Miller Brewery in 2018 and could finally settle down in one place surrounded by family and friends." He works at Miller Valley for less than 2 years. On February 26, 2020, Trevor Wetzelaar goes to work at the brewery where he thought he had found his place. He does not come home. His family's statement ends with a single line. On February 26, 2020, our joyous reunion came to an abrupt and tragic end. After the last shot, Anthony Farrell turns the gun on himself. He is found dead in the stairwell of Building 4, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. 6 bodies in a brewery that has been making beer since before the Civil War. Milwaukee police arrive within minutes, but clearing the scene takes hours. The Miller Valley complex spans 80 acres and contains 20 buildings. More than 1,000 employees are inside, locked in offices, crouched under desks, huddled in break rooms, texting their families, shelter in place, active shooter. Words that no brewery worker ever expects to hear. James Boyles waits at home while his wife, Lasagna Ragdales, texts from inside the claims department. She is locked in a room with a group of co-workers. She does not know if the shooter is still moving. She does not know who is alive and who is dead. All she can do is type messages to her husband and wait. Outside the gates, tactical teams sweep building after building. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives dispatches agents. Nearby schools go into lockdown. Local businesses shut their doors. The neighborhood around State Street, a working-class stretch of Milwaukee's west side that has lived in the shadow of the brewery for generations, holds its breath. By evening, the all-clear is given. Employees file out into the cold. Some go straight to their cars. Others walk down the street to McBob's, a bar that has served Miller Valley workers for 35 years. It is the place where brewery employees celebrate the end of a shift, toast retirements, complain about management. On this night, they come to grieve. "We had people come in crying," recalls Aaron Reynolds, a manager at McBob's. Others came in worried about families and friends who work there. In the days that follow, Milwaukee tries to make sense of what happened and fails. The shooter, Anthony Farrell, is a 51-year-old electrician with a wife, grandchildren, and a Doberman he adores. He has worked at the brewery for more than 15 years. Co-workers describe him in contradictory terms. Quiet, sometimes friendly, sometimes withdrawn. There is no criminal history that would predict mass murder. There is no manifesto. There is no warning. But there are whispers. And the whispers paint a darker picture. The Washington Post reports that years before the shooting, a noose was found hanging on Farrell's locker. A noose, the unmistakable symbol of racial terror in America. Farrell is black. The brewery workforce is predominantly white. Workers tell reporters about a culture of casual racism inside Miller Valley. Racist cartoons circulated among employees. The N-word used openly on the factory floor. None of this is confirmed by Molson Coors. None of it is denied either. Milwaukee police complete their investigation. The official finding, motive unknown, no explanation, no closure, just 5 families bearing husbands and fathers and sons, and 1 family, Farrell's wife and children, carrying a different kind of grief that no one talks about. Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett stands outside the brewery and calls Molson Coors the fabric of this community for more than a century and a half. He urges the city to support the workers inside, but his words carry an unspoken weight. This community has been unraveling for years, long before the first bullet was fired. The timing of the shooting is almost cruelly precise. February 26, 2020. In 3 weeks, the World Health Organization will declare COVID-19 a global pandemic. Milwaukee will lock down. The nation will lock down. The brewery shooting, which in any other year would have dominated national news for weeks, is swallowed by the wave of a virus that kills hundreds of thousands. The grieving at Miller Valley happens in isolation. Molson Coors shuts the brewery for the rest of the week. Counseling services are offered. Employee assistance programs are activated. But then the pandemic arrives and the world moves on. The 5 men who died in Building 4 become a footnote, a tragedy overtaken by a larger tragedy. Molson Coors works with the National Compassion Fund to establish the Miller Valley Survivors Fund. It raises $1.8 million for the families of the victims. Across the street from the visitor center, a memorial is erected, a quiet marker on the edge of the campus where Friedrich Miller once planted his beer gardens. Molson Coors CEO Gavin Hattersley addresses employees. The 5 victims, he says, were powerhouse operators, machinists, and electricians. The backbone of the brewery, the people who actually make the beer. There are no words, he says, to express the deep sadness many of us are feeling right now. 1 year later, on February 26, 2021, the brewery pauses. Each shift begins with a moment of silence. In the afternoon, a virtual ceremony connects all 18,000 Molson Coors employees worldwide. Some workers take the day off. Others choose to come in, because the brewery is the only place where people understand what they went through. Thomas Milner, a brewery worker who was on his way to his shift when the shooting happened and was turned away at the gate, had said something the day of the shooting that stays with you. "It's just weird," he told reporters, "because 9 times out of 10, you're going to know the shooter. It's a tight-knit family. Within the brewery, we all interact with each other. A tight-knit family. That is what the workers call Miller Valley. Even now, even after the buyouts and the mergers and the layoffs and the corporate restructuring that moved their bosses to Chicago and their owners to Montreal. Even after all of that, the people on the factory floor still call it a family. The question is whether anyone outside the factory floor still sees it that way. The Miller Brewery still stands. It has stood on this land since 1855, through the Civil War, 2 World Wars, Prohibition, the Great Depression, 6 corporate owners, and a mass shooting. The 80-acre complex on West State Street still hums with the sound of machinery. The packaging center still fills thousands of cans and bottles every minute. The distribution center, 5 football fields wide, still ships beer to every state in America. The red Miller sign still glows above the Milwaukee skyline, visible from miles away. But if you walk through Miller Valley today, you feel the absence more than the presence. The executive offices are mostly empty. The marketing teams are in Chicago. The corporate strategy is set in Montreal. The Miller name appears on cans of beer brewed in Milwaukee, Fort Worth, Irwindale, and Albany. But the name is just a name now. A trademark owned by Molson Coors Beverage Company, a Canadian corporation that also owns Coors Light, Blue Moon, Leinenkugels, and dozens of other brands. Miller is not the flagship. Miller is one item in a portfolio. In October 2024, the machinists of Miller Valley walk off the job. 43 members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers set up picket lines along West State Street, the same street where Friedrich Miller built his brewery 169 years earlier. Their demands are simple: better wages, better schedules, a reasonable work-life balance, the right to take a vacation without hitting a blackout date. Chris Mecca, the machinist who started at the brewery in 2001 as number 83 on the seniority list, is among them. He has watched the workforce shrink for more than 2 decades. When he arrived, there were more than 80 machinists at Miller Valley. Now there are 43. Molson Coors has not replaced a single one who left. The remaining workers cover the gaps. Extra shifts, extra machines, extra hours. They do the work of 80 with the bodies of 43. Molson Coors hasn't replaced them, and these guys here have stepped up over the time to help the company out, Mecca tells reporters from the picket line. The strike lasts 1 week. The union rejects Molson Coors' final offer, votes overwhelmingly to walk out, and holds the line until a new 3-year contract is reached. Wisconsin AFL-CIO President Stephanie Bloomingdale calls the agreement one that protects work-life balance and includes a family-sustaining wage increase. Molson Coors calls it fair and competitive. Both sides declare victory, but the numbers tell a quieter story. 43 machinists, down from more than 80, down from the hundreds who once filled the shops and corridors of Miller Valley when the brewery was the beating heart of Milwaukee's West Side. A one-week strike by 43 workers barely makes the national news. 20 years ago, it would have shut down the city. The brewery is still running. The beer is still flowing. But Miller Valley is no longer a community. It is a production facility, optimized, streamlined, reduced to its most efficient form. The visitor center still offers tours. The beer gardens still welcome guests on summer afternoons. But the soul of the place, the thing that made Thomas Milner call it a tight-knit family, the thing that brought crying workers to McBob's on the worst day of their lives, that soul is thinner now, stretched across too few people carrying too much weight. And yet in the middle of all this loss, something strange happens. In 2014, Miller Coors makes a decision that seems insignificant at the time. As part of a limited promotion tied to the movie Anchorman 2, the company repackages Miller Lite in its original 1975 can. The white can with the navy blue black letter font, the vintage look, the can that launched a revolution. The response is immediate and overwhelming. Customers do not just buy the retro cans, they demand them. Sales tick up week after week. By September 2014, Miller Coors abandons the promotion and makes the decision permanent. The blue can, the one that made Miller Lite look like a soda, the one that erased 15 years of brand identity, is gone. The white can is back, for good. And here is the part that no one in marketing can fully explain. Consumers begin saying that the beer tastes better, that it is crisper, more refreshing, more like the Miller Lite they remember. The recipe has not changed. Not a single ingredient is different. The beer inside the white can is identical to the beer inside the blue can. But it does not matter. What people are tasting is not the beer. They are tasting the memory of backyard barbecues and Friday nights and football games, and a time when Miller Lite was the original. Not a copycat, not a second choice, but the beer that started it all. The white can gives them permission to remember, and in remembering, they taste something that no recipe can reproduce. Ryan Race, who leads Miller Lite's day-to-day operations, studies every advertisement the brand has run over 4 decades. He watches the trajectory from "taste great, less filling" to the Dick campaign to the forgettable bro ads of the 2000s. His conclusion is simple. After trying to contemporize the brand, what needed to be done is Miller Lite needed to go back to storytelling. Storytelling. That is what Friedrich Miller did when he built 600 feet of brick tunnels beneath Milwaukee. That is what John Murphy did when he put Matt Snell in a rented bar in Manhattan and told him to talk about beer. That is what the Miller Time campaign did when it showed blue-collar workers cracking open a cold bottle at the end of a long day. Miller was never the biggest brewer. It was never the cheapest. But at its best, Miller told a story that millions of Americans wanted to be part of. In March 2025, Miller Lite celebrates its 50th anniversary. The campaign is called Legendary Stories Start with a Light. Christopher Walken narrates. The ads pull from the Miller Lite archives, unscripted moments, behind-the-scenes footage, the raw material of 5 decades of American beer culture. Ann Ligon, Global Vice President for the Miller family of brands at Molson Coors, says, Miller Time has always been about turning ordinary moments into something unforgettable. The Fort Worth Brewery, the plant where 18-year-old Ralph Rodriguez started in shipping in 1975, the plant that ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to keep up with demand, still produces Miller Lite. 50 years, same recipe, same brewery, same beer. But nothing else is the same. Friedrich Miller bought the Plank Road Brewery in 1805 with $2,300 and 25 workers. He carried a jar of brewer's yeast across the Atlantic and built 600 feet of brick caves beneath Wisconsin soil. He died in 1880 believing he had built something that would last. He was right, and he was wrong. The beer lasted. The name lasted. The red sign still burns above Milwaukee. But the family's gone. The independence is gone. The workforce has been hollowed out. The decisions are made by people who have never walked the tunnels beneath Miller Valley. The brewery that once defined a city is now a footnote in the annual report of a Canadian conglomerate. And somewhere beneath the factory floor, the brick caves that Friedrich Miller built in 1855 still stand. Silent, cool, and empty, waiting for someone to remember what they were built for. Miller time is over.